Well, mental health conditions cost the South African economy up to 161 billion rand per year if left untreated. Health economists warn that lost dailies or days of work, presenteeism, which means being at work but unwell, as well as premature mortality, are too costly for the country. South Africa scored the lowest average on the mental health well-being scale in the Mental State of the World 2022 report. Professor Renata Skuman is head of healthcare leadership at Stellenbosch University, or business school rather, and joins us from Cape Town to make sense of this. Prof, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Shocking figures indeed. I mean, 161 billion rand, that is a lot of money and very costly to our economy. Where are we failing with mental health treatment? But also, how is this data also gathered to actually make these predictions?
So in terms of the first question of 161 billion rand, that was a score by the London School of Business and Economical Sciences, where they looked at employed people in terms of presenteeism and absenteeism. And it's indeed a shocking figure. It's more than the whole of the tourism industry. It's more than the social grants in the country. And we cannot afford that. Secondly, the report on the poor state of mental health of the country, we have to bear in mind that they only looked at 34 countries that participated in the study. So many studies or many countries weren't included. But despite that, in terms of our peers, countries that's in a similar situation of South Africa, we scored shockingly low. Now, that is compounded, obviously, with the socioeconomic circumstances we have, with the rolling blackouts, with unemployment, and all of the things that previous insights during tonight's program have shown that affect people. But what is very important is also that we know that there's the aftermath of the COVID pandemic. And during COVID, organizations were very good at taking note of employee health and especially also their mental health. But this effort has not been sustained in the post-COVID era. And there's no concerted effort and also relevant programs to support employees, especially in the hybrid work environment.
And that was where's my next question. Is corporate South Africa taking this serious enough?
I think we have a very reactive approach in South Africa. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, during COVID, we actually did very well, the organizations. But the effort has stained and dwindled away because there's so many other considered pressing needs that leaders want to attend to or have to attend to. But at the same time, if you always have a reactive attitude and only react when there's a problem, this is costly. We know that prevention also in terms of health works much better and it's way more affordable. And these days, especially when we look also at the younger generation and people that's looking for employment, they are looking at companies that really take care of them. They're not only looking at the remuneration package, but they look at mental health support. They look at as part of that, it's very important in terms of the retention and also attraction of people. Otherwise, they will look for different occupations or employment, and you have a high staff turnover, which we know is very, very high and expensive. So it's important that that organizations really look at their employer assistance programs, not only to address stigma, but to have this relevant, proactive and preventative plans in place that also look at facilitating the support of people working from home or in the office or the hybrid model.
And you mentioned the young people definitely taking a different approach, but let's talk about the stigma around mental health in general, and also how can companies then come on board to tackle the stigma that is, around mental health, and what measures can companies put in place to then actually tackle this issue?
Stigma is so pervasive in all aspects, but if we look at the big strides that South Africa has made, for example, with antiretroviral treatment, if we look at the HIV/AIDS stigma, there were a couple of decades ago. But when the conversation comes to the fore, when people start to speak up and say, but me too, I've also struggled, and we realize the prevalence of mental health conditions, which affect up to a third or more of the population at any given time, we realize it's part of us. We don't look different. we don't act different, we can have a fruitful life with the necessary support. So education is very important. I think media is playing such an important role, especially with responsive journalism, to break down the perceived views that people might have of someone with mental health illnesses. But it's also important that companies have this conversation that if we work preventative, and we can support someone, for example, by accessing therapy or being able to go and see a doctor, taking medication, it doesn't mean that someone with mental illness have to be admitted. I think that's where the problem comes in, where often we drive a culture of hospital admissions for all mental health disorders without actually supporting a person in the workplace with an ongoing plan that spans a year instead of just that acute admissions. So education is important, walking the talk, especially from the leaders, but then also to have accessible programs and really to know that people are very, very concerned about confidentiality and anonymity also when they seek support. And in-house programs is not always the best answer.
And that's what companies, a lot of companies do very brilliantly, is have these programs, and they think that's sort of like tackling the whole issue, but it's much more deeper than that, as you mentioned. Let's talk about hybrid work, maybe as one of the possible solutions to this problem, but it might also come with a few risks. Maybe just delve into that as well.
Yeah, it's very important that I think everyone thought what hybrid workplace or hybrid work model will take the best of both. We will have the best from working from home and we will have the best from working in the office. And it can be true. It can afford us the flexibility. You can avoid traffic and commuting time. You can potentially have a better work-life balance. You can tap into the social cohesion and connections that you have at the office in that support. However, what we see is more that we end up with the negatives of both sides of the spectrum. We sit with working from home, the isolation, the blurred boundaries, people really, really struggling to switch off, and organizations not having clear procedures and policies, for example, respecting after hours or respecting family time, or even when someone is on leave, there might still be incessant calls or emails coming through. So we sit with that negative. At the same time, sitting with the negative of being back in the office, people struggle again with office dynamics, with politics, with toxic workplace environments and cultures, and they lost these skills and they lost that demand or the practice of having to navigate this additional stressor of having to navigate in a team. The other problem that we see with the hybrid model is when people often work from home, that they are impaired in their career progression because often you do not see that team interaction. People cannot see how good you are communicating or what your values are in the team aspect, and people are overseen for the promotion purposes. So it's very important that organizations need to realize when working from home, when working in the office, there's different needs, and the hybrid model often make that people falls through the cracks and you do not note the employees that need support. You also don't have employees in the office that you can expose to preventative programs and educational programs, resilience training, for example, in terms of preventing mental health conditions and other difficulties. So it is very important that when we relook EAP programs or the employee assistance programs, that people cater both for those that are working predominantly from home, those that commute and have the flexible work arrangement of a hybrid model, as well as people that's fully in the office, because there will be different needs. And what works for one might not be relevant for some other people.
Thank you so much, Professor Renata Schoeman from Stellenbosch Business School, talking to us from Cape Town about mental health issues costing the country 161 billion rand a year, a huge sum of money, and that figure could even be more as you delve deeper into this issue that is mental health issues. In corporate South Africa, of course, there's a lot that can be done to resolve this issue, and maybe companies should come on board to support their employees, and also employers should also be taking care of themselves and their mental health in a way as well. Let's take a look at this now. Diepsloot residents have vowed to return to the streets should